Hello, my name is Abigail Hickman. Welcome to a Safe Ag Systems webinar. In today's webinar, we're going to look at using the app for owners and supervisors. This webinar is dedicated to looking at the app from the perspective of what an owner and a supervisor can do, and it is an additional webinar to the webinar we have previously run called Using the App for Workers. All the functionality of workers is also in the app for supervisors and owners. So this webinar won't go over that. It will simply cover the additional features within the software app on the app related to owners and supervisors. So to get started, let's share the app. So here we see the home screen of the app as viewable by a supervisor or someone set with business administrator access. So within the system, there are 4 access levels: business administrator, supervisor, worker, and contractor. This view that you see here is the business administrator and supervisor. So this is the view that has the highest level of access. There is no difference between business administrator and supervisor on the app. The differences in these 2 access levels relate to the desktop. Let's now have a look at the home screen of the app from the perspective of a worker. So we now have the view for the worker. As you'll see, there's not a lot of difference in the perspective of the home screen other than the People tab here is replaced by My Details. So supervisors and business administrators have access into all the individuals who are users on the system, whereas the worker access only allows them to view their own details. Workers also have different access levels as to what they can do under things like inductions, policies, procedures, etc. They cannot, for instance, assign inductions to anyone other than a visitor, whereas a supervisor and business administrator can assign inductions to anyone. So now let's have a look at the home screen of the app from the perspective of a contractor. So here we see logging in as a contractor. Now, as a contractor, this is a contractor who I am connected to through the contractor directory. And because someone listed on the contractor directory can be connected to multiple businesses, the first view I get is to select which farm or which business I wish to connect with. So in this particular case, I'm connecting with Craigmore Farms. And now we get the view from the perspective of the contractor. So as you can see, this is again more restricted. They do not have access to inventory. And once again, while they do have access to things like inductions, they can only do their own inductions. They can only view policies and procedures that you have set access to for supervisors. And they have access into a visitor register to actually register, but not to actually view who has come and gone. So they can sign in and sign out, but they have no access to logs. They do have access into the task manager, but again, they're not going to have access to everything in the system. It's a very restricted view of just their own tasks and no one else's. So in this particular case, this contractor has no task set, but if they did, the only task they would see would be their own. So contractors do also have access to the emergency information, which is clearly something they need access to, so they can gain access to your emergency response plans, for instance, directions for emergency services, important site information, and call important contacts. They can also put in a report on a new hazard. They can raise a near miss and incident report. And obviously, once again, in here, this is just a new task that they're adding into the system. Okay, so that's just a bit of a brief look at the different levels of access and what it provides for the app. If you are uncertain as to what different access levels provide on the app, you can access this information through one of our help articles called Access Levels Explained. This can be viewed from either the desktop or the app. From the app, you go onto the cog, you click on the Help and Resources section and then the Help Centre. This will then bring up our website of help resources. You click on the knowledge base and type in access levels. This will then bring up the Access Levels Explained article, which you can then read through. And down here, it's got a table displaying what access different individual access levels provide. So the top section is related to the desktop and the bottom section relates to the app. So as you can see on here, contractors have a very different access level to anyone else. Workers have more restricted access levels. And when you look at supervisors and business administrators, they are the same and they have access to everything with the exception of My Details. And the reason they don't have the My Details tab is because they have the People tab, which has much greater level of access. Okay, so we'll now go back to the app and we'll log in as a business administrator. So we're now on the login page. On the login page, you have 4 options to log in with. One is username and password, or alternatively, you can use Google, Microsoft, or Apple with your existing credentials with those providers. If you choose to use Google, Microsoft, or Apple, just be aware that if you forget those credentials and you don't know, for instance, your password, SafeX Systems cannot support you with this. You will need to contact either Google, Microsoft, or Apple, whichever one you are using, to support you with your access. If you're using username and password, however, we certainly can help you. And this is the process that I will use today. So I've chosen to log in using my my fingerprint, which just increases the security access. You can also use face recognition. These are features that are controlled by your phone. So if your phone has these features built in, then you can certainly utilize them to increase the security of access into the system. Okay, so we now come to look at the home screen of the app. And we'll just work through it, starting out with a bit of an overview of the bottom. So at the bottom on the far left-hand side, you've got what looks like 4 little windows. This is the QR code reader. Now, the QR code reader is used to access inventory generally. If you have your inventory QR coded, this is a option for people with professional subscriptions, then you can you can access that inventory from the using the QR code, which speeds up that process instead of having to go into inventory and search up the inventory item. The other area that you can access the QR code reader is outside of the system. So if I now log out, I'll be taken to the login page where I've got login button and a scan QR code button. Now, this scan QR code button is useful for individuals who are not users in your system, for instance, visitors or contractors that you haven't added. They can use the scan QR code button here. They cannot access inventory, and neither can you from outside the system, but you can open an induction and they can open the visitor log. So we'll touch on this as we go through, but it's just useful to be aware that there are actually 2 areas where you could scan a QR code, but they have 2 different functions. So we'll log in once again. So back on the app, The next function over at the bottom is the at work, not at work function. So this is across the banner at the bottom, second from the left. If we open up that, it shows you who is at work and who is not at work. So you will get a view of everyone on the property. And if you click at work, it will then show who is at work. In this case, it's just me. But if there were multiple people at work, then they would all be listed here. Now, this view is also viewable to workers, so they will also see who else is at work. And if you click on the individual, it will show you where they are located on the property. This can be helpful if you haven't heard from someone or they're not responding and you want to know where they are. Now, be aware that the way this tracking system works is that it will geolocate where an individual is located when they open up the app. So the last time they opened up the app will be the last time they are shown on the map. If they haven't opened the app for 2 hours and they have moved, the app will not be able to update their location unless they actually hop back on the app. So you will have a record of where they were located and the time. So this says 10:10 a.m. So you will also have a time of their last location as well. If someone sets themselves to not at work, then they disappear off the list of people on the app and they can no longer be located. The middle button is to add a task. I won't go through this because it's fairly self-explanatory. The next button over with the little apostrophe in the triangle is the report function. So here you can add new hazards, add a near miss and incident report, and add in a new task. So that button to add a new task is identical to the middle button here to add a new task as well. And then finally, on the far right-hand side, you have your emergency information or your emergency button. On this, you can raise an alert, and so can all your workers. So this is a page that everybody has access to. If you raise a medical alert or a fire alert, it will immediately alert everybody on the property. So this goes to the notice board, which I'll come to in a moment, and it will also send out a push notification. So that's a little notification that comes up on everyone's device. A proviso here, everyone's device where they are or have been logged on. If they're logged out of the app, they won't get the push notification, but logged on, irrespective of whether they are on the app or whether they've got it minimized, they will get a push notification to alert them to the fact that there's been an emergency. You can view that emergency on the map, but I won't do that from here. And in here, you have access to emergency information. So this is information set up in the emergency feature on the desktop. That's where this information is set, and then you can access it from here. Safety data sheets are safety data sheets which have been connected to chemicals listed in inventory on the desktop. Now they can also be viewed here. And health action plans. So health action plans, again, they're covered in the Manage People webinar, but they can be accessed here if you've got individuals which may have allergies or anaphylactic reactions, etc. And a health condition that would potentially require some intervention from a worker or a colleague if they had an incident at work. All of these fields are interactive. So if I click on them, and I click on the location and I click on call important contacts, I can use these buttons to call all of these people. So the app is interactive and you just click the button of what you're needing to access. So now let's come to the notice board. So the notice board is an area where everybody can view with the exception of contractors. Contractors cannot view your notice board. But workers, supervisors, and business administrators can view and can post on the notice board. So the purpose of the notice board is to record important conversations which are happening in your business. For instance, and it doesn't necessarily have to just relate specifically to safety. It can relate to ensuring that people are okay. If you can use this feature to get workers that might be working in isolation to actually check in periodically so that you know that they're okay. As you can see, the medical emergency that I raised has been posted to the notice board, and you have the option to click on it and view on the map. Now, these emergency alerts are shown on the map for a period of 24 hours and then will disappear. So you can see here that this is the medical emergency. So you can go onto the map and see where that emergency has been located if you're not sure where the person is. And then after 24 hours, it'll disappear. So if you can see up here, I've raised one a few days ago. If I click on this, it will tell me that the emergency has expired and can no longer be found. So that's the notice board. It's important to notice that these things, while you can delete them off the desktop, there's no delete function on the app. So it's not a location for skylarking. It's an important area to retain notes and to retain conversation so that you can demonstrate that you are communicating with your workers and ensuring that they are safe. I would encourage you to have a conversation with your employees and workers as to how you want this used. It's there for an important function. So explain that to them and set some parameters as to how you want it used for your business. Now, be aware that the notice board will not work if you are offline. So if people do not have connectivity, they will not get push alerts. If you raise an emergency or you send a notice on the notice board and they're out of range, no one will receive it. It will go on the notice board, but it will not be raised and it will not actually appear on the notice board until such time as they come back into service. The push alert won't work because the push alert is raised at the time that the notice or the emergency is raised. So it won't then reoccur when they come into range. So if you have areas of your property or your business location where people are working out of service, then you will need to have a communication and identify an alternative method of communication in these locations. That might be UHF or some obviously telephone won't work either. So just something to be aware of and to make sure that you have a procedure in place for how you're going to manage that when people are out of range. So now we'll come back to the task manager. So the task manager is fairly logical as far as your tasks are concerned for yourself, and they are no different in how you would manage them to how a worker would manage theirs. So we won't go into those. What you do have in here, however, is a tab for unassigned tasks. So these tasks are tasks that have been raised in the system but are not assigned to anyone else at this point in time. Some of these tasks may be auto-generated. For instance, maintenance for a machine will be auto-generated based on a date that is placed when someone does a maintenance record. They put a date on when the next maintenance is due, which will then generate a task to come up in here saying maintenance is due on that machine. So obviously you have the option as a business administrator or supervisor to come in here, click on the task and decide if you want to edit it. So up here at the top on the far right-hand side, you've got the 3-dot menu, you can edit. Alternatively, you can duplicate. So if you want to make multiple tasks, you want to duplicate them or make an identical task for a couple of months later, you can come in here and duplicate it. And you also have the option to delete it. The edit view will give you the same view as a task has. It's no different. You simply can add in the additional details if you wish. You can put in a position. You can add in documents, etc. Once again, these have been covered in a previous webinar relating to both workers using the app and also the Safety Manager webinar. Okay, so you cannot start. You'll notice that up here, I do not have an option at the moment to start this task, and that's because the task has not yet been assigned. So to assign a task, you need to edit it. Come down here to the assignee field, and then decide who you're going to assign it to. Now, there's a number of options around assigning tasks. You can assign it to an individual, which is obviously the simplest thing to do. You can also assign it to groups. So if you want all workers to have the task assigned to them,
you can simply click that group of individuals, and that will then allocate it to all workers. If you also have the option up here to assign it to something called anyone. Now, anyone is essentially a bucket of tasks, if I can put it like that, which are available to be done but are not assigned to anyone in particular. It's pretty much just there for anybody to pick up. So that's an option there to assign the task to anyone if you wish. Tasks that are assigned to anyone will be accessible by all levels with the exception of contractor. So that's the process for assigning it. Now, if I assign it to myself and click save, I now have the option to start the task. So now comes up this button at the bottom, which says not started at the moment, and I can now mark it to as incomplete, as in progress or complete. I can put it on hold, or alternatively, I can withdraw the task. Now, these functions are available for any task for supervisors and business administrators. For workers, they are only going to be able to edit, change the status of their own tasks. They can't change the status of someone else's. Workers can raise tasks for other people. So they can set the assignee to yourself or someone else in the business. So they do have that option. They just can't, once it's been assigned, it disappears from their view. Okay, and then you also have this final function, which is all tasks. So this gives you a view of all the tasks in the business, irrespective of who they're allocated to or assigned to, I should say. And you can then come in here and change this. You also have the option to filter. So you can filter based on the status of the task, the assignee, the due date, the priority, the risk, and the type. So if you're using this as a task manager and you have lots of tasks going on in the business, you may find it necessary to filter it. You can also sort in here based on date, priority, task, date, priority, status, and created date. So once again in here, you have the option to go into any of these tasks and edit them. Because this one's not assigned to you, it can't be started at this point in time, but once again, you can edit it. And sorry, this one's unassigned, but you can change, even if it was assigned to somebody, you could assign it to someone different if you needed to. So that's a brief look at the task manager from the perspective of a supervisor or manager or business administrator around how you can manage tasks. Now we come to the people tab. So this is a tab that is only available for supervisors and business administrators. And under here, you have access to all the people that are added into your people section on the desktop. You can also see who is assigned as a first aid officer or a fire warden. Simon here is a first aid officer. If he was a fire warden, he would also have a little hat next to him. So you can open up these individuals and have a look at their details. It's fairly limited as to how much information is on here, but you can certainly have a look at what inductions they've done, the training that they have on file. You can check out what checklists they have completed, what policies they've accepted, and what procedures they have accepted. So if you're not sure if someone has completed an induction or undertaken some other task that you have required them to do, you can certainly come in here and check the status of them. Okay, as far as your own details are concerned, you will access them under the cog, and at the top you've got user details. So this is where you would edit your own information, not under people. So now let's come to inventory. So the inventory tab is fairly common as to how it looks across supervisors, business administrators, and workers. As I said earlier, this is an area that contractors cannot see. The only way they can gain access to a machine is through the QR code. If we jump into machinery and hop into the machine, you have the option to edit. Now, this comes up with log engine hours. This also does this for workers, and it'll do it for contractors if they're accessing the machine through the QR code. This will only come up if you have set a maintenance unit on the desktop. So this one here had the maintenance unit set to hours, and so it's coming up prompting the user to log the hours that it's done. We won't bother to do this for now. So as I said earlier, you've got the view function. This is common to everyone to actually come in and have a look through and view the information on the machine. You have the option to edit. This is not an option that workers have. So you can come in here and edit the information on it. Now, just a note with regards to locking out or tagging out a machine. Locking out and tagging out a machine cannot be done by a worker. So if a worker identifies an issue with a machine, they should be raising a task on it and setting it to, or assigning it, I should say, to a business administrator or supervisor, whoever is responsible. If you need to lock out a machine, you simply come in here, click on lock out, tag out, and click yes, done, and then click save. Now that generates a series of push notifications which go out to individuals to say that particular machine cannot be used or should not be used. And it will also send an email through to your business contact, which is under your business details, to say that that machine has been locked out. If I now open this machine, it'll come up with a little note to say it's locked out and tagged out and should not be operated. So this is this screen will appear for everyone accessing this machine, including contractors if they're accessing it through the scanning QR code. The rest of the area in here is much the same for everyone. They can add maintenance. They can view the maintenance logs. So this is where you can go and have a look and see what maintenance has been done and determine if additional maintenance needs to be done. They can access checklists. I won't go through this because it's been done in the other webinar relating to using the app for workers. The same with procedures, where you can go and read procedures. Supervisors and business administrators can archive a machine. Again, that's not an access level that workers can do. Anyone can add a task and anyone can log hours. We'll come to risk assessments a bit later. So let's hop out of inventory. Chemicals, structures and tools are very similar to machinery, just have a little less detail involved. And chemicals, again, much the same as far as the changes that you can make, where you can archive a chemical and you can edit a chemical. The usage side of things has been covered in using the app for workers. So if you're wanting to have a look at how to actually use chemicals and how you manage that side of things, refer back to that webinar. All right, so now we come to risk assessments. Now, risk assessments is an area of the app which is available to everyone, irrespective of their access level. However, it's probably not something that would genuinely done by a worker, so it hasn't been covered in using the app for workers webinar. So we'll cover it here. So what is a risk assessment? A risk assessment is a very structured process of looking at either a hazard or a machine or a task, something that you may have done, maybe doing, which you need to review the risks associated with it before you proceed. Risk assessments can be attached to inventory, which you would have seen in the when we were having a look at that machine earlier. And in this particular, when they're attached to a machine, they're a risk assessment on that machine. Now, depending on your area of work, it may actually be a requirement for you to do a risk assessment before, this would particularly relate to contractors, before they can actually use their machine on that particular site. So the process for running a risk assessment. It's fairly intuitive and very supported through this app. So it will walk you through the process to do. You have a view of undertaking a new one, to access one that's you're already got in progress. And then once one has been completed, it then needs to be approved. So you've got the to be approved tab. And then under the active tab is where all the completed and approved risk assessments can be located. You'll see on the right of the Case IH Magnum 355, there's a little link here. So that indicates that that particular risk assessment is linked to an inventory item. If I come in here, it says it is linked to 2 items. And if I click on that, it tells you which items it is linked to. So it's linked to my 2 tractors. I have the option to select an action here. So I can unlink it from the machinery, or I can link it to another one. To do that, I would simply click on the link. It brings up my list of inventory items. If I wanted to also attach it to the Case IH Magnum, I simply tick that and click link, and it's now linked to 3 items. You can also view the assessment. So this will bring up all of the details of how the assessment was done. So you'll see here that the assessment is a series of questions with yes/no answers, and then flow-on questions or functions, checklists that need to be ticked off as you go. Can any of the following items become entangled, etc.? And then you have to tick. If it's none of the above, it will move you on to the next question. And if you keep clicking none of the above, it'll just continue to walk through. You'll see here that this particular one, can someone come in contact with high pressure fluid or gases due to, and then it gives a list of options. I've, in this case, ticked misuse of plant items. Now, as soon as I tick something that could be a risk or a hazard, it'll come up and say, I need to identify the inherent risk associated with it. Once I've identified the risk, it'll then give it a risk rating. So for individuals which are familiar with something called a risk matrix, there's a risk matrix built into this risk assessment, which it is then using your responses around what's the likelihood and what's the consequence to identify the risk rating. And once it's identified the risk rating, it'll then prompt you to control it. If it's high or medium, it'll say it needs to be controlled. If it's low, it'll give you the option to move on. So in this particular case, it's been high. So I've then had to go in and identify how we can control the risk. So it will use the hierarchy of controls. Once again, this is a very common tool used in the safety, in management of safety, to identify the best control measure. The first and best control measure will always be eliminate, and then it will move you through substitute, isolate, and engineer as it works down through the control options in less preferred order. The final 2 are administrative and PPE, which quite commonly will be used in conjunction with the top 4. And once again, it'll give you the option of putting in exactly what administrative controls need to be put in place and what personal protective equipment should be utilised. So in this particular case, because I've clicked no, I haven't actually been able to put in anything relating to the eliminate, substitute, isolate, or engineering controls. But had I clicked yes, I would have had the option to also record what needed to be done. So if there's certain controls which have been put in place on machines or tools or a hazard, then they will be recorded in here, and individuals can view the risk assessment and read them so that they're familiar with what they should be doing. So we'll now jump back out of that risk assessment. You can archive a risk assessment. So if you've archived one, that'll be there, and you can import. So this is also important. If you have, say, a contractor who you've required to do a risk assessment on a machine, be aware that contractors do not need a paid subscription to be able to access the risk assessment. They can take out either what we call a freemium subscription with us. So it's just a free basic subscription, which gives them access to risk assessments and not a great deal more. If you require them to do a risk assessment on a machine or on a hazard, they can do that, and they can then provide you with a assessment code from that risk assessment, and you can then import it into here so that you have access to it. Okay. That is covered also in the Safety Manager webinar, a little bit more detail as to the way of doing it, but it's fairly simple. You just go into import and put in the code, and you can import it in. So the process for doing a risk assessment, click new. You have 3 options in here: machinery and equipment, tools, and a general hazard. You choose whichever one you wish to do and click next. And then, as I said, give it a title and a name and a location. It's going to automatically set myself as the person doing it, but you can add additional participants from your user tiles if you wish. So these are people added as users in your system. You can add a photo of whatever it is, whatever the hazard is that you are doing an assessment on. And then it will come up with a specific location. So as I said earlier, and we won't go through this in great detail, but it will then prompt you through what you should do. The risk assessment for hazard is actually the simplest. If you do one for a machine, it could take you quite some time to go through it. So once again, if you want more detail about a risk assessment, hop onto the Safety Manager webinar, and it's gone through there in greater detail. Now, one question we do get is doing a risk assessment on a task. So if you are a business that requires individuals to do a risk assessment on a task every time they undertake it, under checklist, you'll find what, and all checklists, I've got this one published. So a task risk assessment. So if you're wanting to do a risk assessment on a task, you can attach the task, you can attach the task risk assessment checklist to the task, and then people can undertake it every time they do that task. So that's just a note that a task risk assessment is not actually located under the risk assessment function. It's located under checklists. All right, checklists, fairly logical as to how they're done. I'm not going to go into great detail into here. What you do have access to in here that not everyone does is checklist logs. So you can come in here and view all the logs of checklists which have been completed. That's not an access that everybody has. You obviously have what checklist you have in progress, and all checklists, which again, this is also a view that is accessible for workers and business administrators and contractors and supervisors. So everybody has access to this. However, when you publish checklists, and this is also the case for policies and procedures, when you publish them on the desktop, at that point in time, you have the option to set the access levels of who can view it. So if the access level has been set to everybody, then everyone can view it. If it hasn't been, only those people whose access level has been set on that particular document will be able to see it. Okay, so we now come to policies and procedures. These are very, very similar documents in how they are handled in the app. They're obviously different documents as far as what they do. Policies being essentially your business rules, and procedures being processes for how tasks or jobs or machinery should be operated. So under policies and procedures, you have the option to view logs. So if you're not sure who's accepted a policy or who's accepted a procedure, you can pop in here and have a look. You can't assign policies and procedures as such from here, but if you need to assign policies and procedures from the app, you can create a task for that particular individual. Give it a name of please accept attached documents. Give a description if you need. I'm not going to fill that in. But then if you come down here and you go on documents and links, you have the options of attaching documents. So you can attach a policy, and you could then go ahead and attach a procedure if you so need to. You can add a link if required, and then come up here and assign it to whoever it is that you need to assign that particular documents to, and click save. That will then create Jack a task. In this particular case, he will get an alert to say he's got a task allocated to him. He can then go into that task, accept those documents, and it will then come up in the logs under policies and procedures once he's accepted them. When you assign a task to an individual, when the task is completed, you also get an alert to say that task has been completed. So you will get notification when he's done it. Okay, so now let's come and look at inductions. So I'm not going to go into detail as to how to complete an induction, because that's something that is all fairly logical and covered in the app for workers in webinar. However, there's one function that you have in here which others don't, which is to assign inductions. Now, workers can assign inductions to a visitor, but they can't, and they can't assign them to my people. So the process to assign induction, you need to have an induction saved on the desktop, which you have approved as to be used in your business. Once that is done, you can then just simply come in here, select the induction, select the inductee, and click send. By clicking send, you're not sending an email. What you're doing is assigning that induction to them, and they will get an alert on their app to say they have an induction to complete. If they're logged out of the app, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, they will not get the alert. They need to be logged in, but the app can be minimized. If they're not logged in, you may need to prompt them to do it if it sits there and they haven't done it for a while. Okay, contractors. Again, similar process in here. Pop in the induction. So this is no different to how you would do it for a worker, with the exception that you now have a list of contractors in your system. So there's two ways, and I'm not going to go into this in detail here because it's done in the Manage People webinar. Two ways to add contractors. One is a user in your system, and the other is to connect through the contractor directory. Certainly the latter is preferable, for reasons that I'm not going to go into now, but you simply select the inductee contractor and click send or begin. So this is where it differs. You can click begin and work through this induction with the contractor side by side. So that's an important difference. Okay, and the final one is a visitor. Once again, here you don't have the option to select from a drop-down menu. It's assumed that the visitor is not a user in your system, obviously. So they would go through here and click begin and do the induction that way. So I also mentioned earlier that you can do an induction with visitors and contractors from outside the app. So this is an important function. Not always you'll never have visitors in the system. If you're physically there with the visitor or with the contractor, sure, you can go in here and do the induction with them. But if you are off-site or you do not actually get to see them, you can put a QR code somewhere in your business, be that at the front gate on a sign or at the workshop, however you wish to manage it, and they can complete the induction from outside the system. So I'll just demonstrate this. So I'm going to click on the little cog and log out now. So for a visitor or contractor to complete an induction, if you're not around, they will need to download the app, but they do not need to be a user in the system, as I mentioned earlier. So instead of clicking login, they will select scan QR code. That'll bring up the QR code reader, scans the QR code of the induction, and in they go. Now, they will put in the inductor. They will bring up the list of individuals who can induct them. So in this case, it will be myself. Put in their name, whoever they are, and then click begin. Now, when you do an induction this way, and this has been covered in our inductions webinar, so I won't go into it in great detail here, but when you do an induction this way, at the end, you have the option for multiple sign-off. So if there's 3 or 4 visitors, or there's a contractor with more than one individual associated with that contracting business coming into your property, they can work through the induction together and complete it together. And at the end, they all sign off on the one induction. Okay. So we're now back on the home screen of the app with the view for business administrators and supervisors. We've covered inductions. We're now getting down to the bottom here. So you do have your hazard map. This is common for everyone, but you can hop in and have a look at the hazard map. You've got the option to add items. So this is where you can add in additional hazards or items, so things that are not hazards or things which are not on the map. What you can't do from here is add in lines. So if you're wanting to add in polygons, for instance, paddocks, or you want to add in a power line or something like that, a pipeline, you'll need to do that from the desktop. So that's the hazard map. You do have in here the option to filter out, so you can view on different layers if you wish. You don't have to view all layers at once. And you can actually look on a list of items if you wish to. So you can do a search on them if there's a particular one that you're looking for. So if you wish to see the hazards as a list or the items as a list, you simply click Show in List at the top of the app map, and it'll bring up the list instead of showing it as a map view. Okay, inspections. Now, this area of the app is currently in transition into checklists. Inspections are a series of prompts to work you through inspecting an area to make sure that it is safe. So a bit different to a risk assessment, where a risk assessment is a specific identification of hazards and how they should be controlled. An inspection is more a check to see if there's hazards present. If you identify the hazards, then you would go on potentially and do a risk assessment on some of those hazards to ensure they're controlled appropriately. So under our system, we have a whole series of different inspections. There's many more than this in the system, saved under checklists. So they will go through sections and they'll prompt you through a series of questions, which you then need to agree or action. So if you say agree, it'll simply move you through to the next statement. If you say, no, I'm not doing that, all workers are given a farm tour or taken through the hazard map to ensure they are aware of all areas. If that hasn't been done, you click on action and it would create a task, or prompt you to create a task, I should say, to rectify whatever it is that you're not doing. Now, these things are currently in the process of being transitioned into checklists, so they are already located there. And the inspection tab, we would anticipate, will disappear from this view and move under checklists, probably sort of middle of 2023. If you're already using the inspections function, you can continue doing this and all your records will transition over when we complete that process. If you haven't started using it, then you could consider using those located under checklists. Just be aware that under checklists, they're saved in the template library, so you won't have automatic access to them. You'll need to go into checklists, choose the ones you wish to use and publish them so that you can access them and use them from checklists. The visitor register is a simple sign in and sign out process where you can sign someone in and sign someone out. It is location based, so if you have multiple locations on your system, they will all appear here and you'll just need to sign them in or sign them out. Get them to sign. You can QR code a location. So this is an area of the program which visitors and contractors for that matter, can access through the QR code from outside of the program. So the same way I demonstrated them doing it to access a induction, the same process to access the visitor register. You just need to QR code your location to be able to do that. So if they're not doing it themselves and you want to do it themselves, obviously you can sign them in. Again, you can sign them out as well. And finally, you have the option to view logs. So you can come up and see who's signed in and out of Craigmore Farms in this particular case and what dates they've been in and out. So that's a visitor register, essentially a very, very similar process to what you might have if you used a paper form. So final area that we'll look at is the little cogwheel in the top right-hand corner. This is fairly logical as far as your user details that you have access to, help and resources, which I showed earlier, which is access onto our system. You have the option to check what version you're running, both of the SafeAg system software and also your device. And you can check for a new version. You can change your password here, switch accounts. So if you have multiple subscriptions which you access, not just one SafeAg system subscription, you can switch between them here. And finally, you can log out if you need to. Just a little note on the data management here. So if you are working offline, your phone will come up with a red banner saying that it is working offline. And when you come back into range, the data will upload automatically generally. Now, occasionally that may not work as smoothly as you wish, in which case you might want to come up in here and actually force it by clicking the upload offline data. You can also refresh your device data. So if you feel like you've done something on the desktop and it hasn't immediately appeared on the app, you can pop in here and refresh it. And then finally, clear device data. Not something you'll do very often, because once you clear the device data, you obviously lose the data you've done, which has not been already uploaded to the desktop. So that's a very important proviso. If it's already uploaded to the desktop, you're not going to be clearing it. But if you've been doing things on your device offline and then you click clear device data, it will wipe that data and it won't be uploaded when you're next in range.
Well, that's the end of our webinar relating to supervisors and owners. So I hope you found this webinar useful. If you require some additional information, please don't hesitate to reach out, or if you have any questions, we can be contacted by phone or email, phone being 088 490 0939, or via email help@safeagsystems.com. If you would like to attend some of the other webinars in our sessions, please jump onto our website, go to the For Farmers Help and Resources section, and you'll find our webinars listed there, and you can check into them. Webinars do quite often, and other help articles also do quite often get posted to our YouTube channel. So you can also hop on there and have a look around. Thank you for your time, and keep safe, keep farming.